We've all had ideas before, things that we thought, oh, this is it, this is the perfect answer, this is the solution, I'm definitely going to do this. And then we later find out that we're totally way and completely off base. Probably for me, the number one way that this happens is I think that when my driving directions on my smartphone are wrong, then I'll take a shortcut. And, because I know better, I've been driving longer than this phone's been alive. And yes, I did say my phone has been alive. It winds up being like, yeah, everybody else that was using their phone to get there beat you there. It wasn't a shortcut anyway. And, it happens in all areas of our lives. It's maybe like, oh, yeah, this job is going to be the best thing that ever happened to my family. Or I definitely need to marry this girl. Or I got to go to this school. And at the time, everything that you were doing felt right, felt good. You had all the information that you needed. And you thought you were making a really wise choice, only to find out in hindsight that it was super the wrong direction. And it can be humbling. It can be devastating. It can be frustrating. And the truth of the matter is that there's a difference between knowledge and wisdom. There's a difference between information and right decisions. You can be the most informed person on the planet and still make poor choices. I mean, think about it. We are probably the most information overload generation that's ever existed. And we're flooded with it. We have advice, we have podcasts, we have influencers, YouTube gurus, opinionated friends, and everyone has an angle, everyone has an opinion, everyone is telling you the best way, the wisest way, the most important way. And everyone speaking into you and over you sounds really smart. But if we're honest, it's not the amount of information that makes you wise. I mean, maybe these voices are loud, or maybe they're confused, and maybe they have a bunch of information, so maybe that information just makes you louder and more confused. We need something deeper. We need something bigger. We need something more, infinite to be our source of wisdom. And that's why, as Christ followers, we turn to God. God's our source of wisdom. Proverbs calls wisdom the beginning. Now think about that for a second. It's not an upgrade. It's not an add-on. It's not a bolt-on. It's not a download or anything like that. It's the starting line. It's the foundation. It's the very beginning. And it doesn't begin wisdom with self-confidence, and it doesn't begin with information downloads. It begins with reverence. So where does true wisdom come from, in other words? And how do I actually grab a hold of it? How do I attain it? How do I get it? Let's go to what seems natural to me, at least, to Proverbs chapter 1. If you're not familiar with Proverbs, you're going to take your Bible, you're going to hold it right in the middle, you're just going to kind of let it fall open. So take your Bible and just let it fall open, and you're going to be near Psalms. And then the next book after Psalms is Proverbs. So the book of Psalms, then the book of Proverbs. Proverbs, chapter 1, it's often referred to as the book of wisdom. And this particular passage that we're going to read right now, not all Proverbs were written by Solomon, but it's a collection of works of the wise sayings of the kings for the most part. And this proverb, it particularly is a proverb of Solomon. Most of them will tell you who they are. Some of them don't. But as you're reading them, pay attention. Because when you're reading the book of wisdom, when you're reading Proverbs, and it says who it was written for, it helps you to understand the context by which, or the lens by which you're looking at it. It says, a proverb of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And then it gives you its application in verse 2. For gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding the words of insight, for receiving instruction, prudent behavior, doing what is right, that is just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, and knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and the riddles of the wise. And then he says all of that, right? All of the reason that it's there. And then here's the proverb. Here's the statement. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And so there's 7 verses that unpack what he's about to say. 7 verses that are a preamble to the verse itself. 7 verses that say, this is the way that you could use it. This is why this is important. Please pay attention. If you're old, if you're young, if you're rich, if you're poor, this is a verse that came from King Solomon. If we want to listen to King Solomon, the wisest king Israel ever knew, here's what he has to say about wisdom. Wisdom has a starting point. Wisdom has a beginning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. And so if you want to gain wisdom, in other words, wisdom is knowledge or information, right? Applied in real time over a span of time. So like when you take knowledge and you apply it to your life and then you learn from it and you actually have application, so action attached to the information so that you have results that are tested. That's what wisdom is. And so when he says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge and fools despise wisdom and instruction, he isn't talking about being afraid of God. This is a phrase that I know I've wrestled with my whole life in growing up in church is like, why does God want me to be afraid of him? No, it's not fear like he's going to hit me or hurt me or he doesn't love me. It's reverence. It's awe. It's fear in the sense of like I place him in a position of awe. So here's an example. And we don't use this word this way in modern English very often, but I'm not afraid of lions. I'm not afraid of lions. And here's why I'm not afraid of lions. The context in which a lion would attack me, eat me, kill me is very, very little. In all the places that I've traveled for missions, international and otherwise, I've never been anywhere where there's a lion other than in a zoo context, right? So I don't go to bed at night thinking, I hope a lion doesn't eat me. Now, I'm sure there are people in this world that when they lay their head on their pillow at night have to worry about that, but that's not something I have to be afraid of. That being said, so I'm not afraid of lions, but I have a healthy fear of lions. So if I was in a room and there was a lion, I would give it the proper interaction, respect, space. I would remove myself from its presence because it needs me to give it that space, that place, that reverence or appropriate behavior when interacting with a lion. In fact, most of the time in normal contexts, an animal like a lion, if you give it its appropriate amount of space, it's going to move right past you and leave you alone. Why? Well, unless it's starving, you're not its prey. And so it's going to move right past you and leave you alone. It's when you get too close. It's when you get too crazy. It's when you get too ridiculous, right? Now, the metaphor breaks down because we can present ourselves to God and we can be in his presence and he is loving and kind. But when we're using the context of respect or fear of God, what we're saying is that we're treating God with the proper respect because God is powerful and a force to be reckoned with. I don't fear the weather, but I have a meaningful respect for tornadoes. And again, there's people that go to bed at night and are worried about tornadoes wrecking their trailer. I don't do that. I don't have to worry about that. But I also know that it's something to be thinking about when you're in a place, in a space where you're going to come into the presence of severe weather. Does this make sense? So when we talk about the fear of God, what we're talking about is standing in awe of him. We're talking about reverence and humility and surrender. In other words, wisdom starts when we admit that God knows more than we do. Now, of course, that's an easy sentence to say. And if I asked you, do you think God knows more than you? Most people in a Judeo-Christian worldview would say, of course God knows more than me. He's God, he's big, I'm small, he's smart, I'm dumb. And yet, we treat God with such a lack of respect, a lack of fear, a lack of, like we don't even think that he's wise most of the time in our practical application of our everyday lives, because if we thought he was wise, we'd listen to his teaching. And so you don't find real wisdom by relying on your feelings. And that's the culture that we live in right now. And my truth, in other words, I feel. My truth is, what's your truth? No, that's not wisdom, nor is that truth. Those are your feelings. And there's nothing wrong with feelings, but feelings aren't always factual. And so you can't rely on your feelings as a source of wisdom. You honestly, you cannot rely on just your friends as your source of wisdom. And you certainly shouldn't be relying on your social media feed as your source of wisdom. Do you know how many times I've had conversations with people about real life crisis that's happening, and someone will say, I saw a TikTok. I paid for this course online. And all of a sudden, because you took a master class online, you're an expert in the conversation that we're having? That's not wisdom. That's just information. It's probably not even good information, but it's information. But because they attached a monetary, quantifier to it, you think that it's valuable, or you think that it's worth something. And we'll give more reverence, more awe, more fear of influencers on social media than we actually fear God. You can walk in wisdom that's man's wisdom only for so long. But you can't walk in God's wisdom if you're not willing to bow to his authority. This is what I mean when I say the fear of God. The fear of God is the beginning of all real knowledge, all real understanding, all meaningful, legitimate truth, all wisdom. And so what if the decisions that we made this week started, instead of with the pressure to make a decision, started with the posture of prayer? The reason that we started this conversation with how many of you guys have ever made a bad decision only to find out that it was a bad decision later. You thought it was a good decision. You thought you were being wise. If you were honest with yourself, you were probably under a significant amount of pressure at the time. And pressure is going to push you to make poor choices. But a posture of prayer, in other words, the fear of the Lord, asking God what he thinks is best, and not asking God always what he can give you, but God, how can I serve you? When I pray, this is my posture when I pray. Not God give me, not God bless me, not God do this for me, but God put me in a position where I can honor you and serve you best. And when I honor and serve God wholeheartedly, when I fear God, this is the wisdom that I think Solomon's talking about here. When I fear God, or put him in his proper place as the creator of heaven and earth, worthy of my praise, not a cosmic vending machine or the big Santa in the sky. When I treat him the way that he deserves to be treated, and I do my job of serving the things and the people and the places that he's called me to, then he blesses me with what I need and gives me wisdom, knowledge, and discernment. And so maybe God's calling you to let go of the control that you've been feeling the pressure to hold on to, and allowing him to actually lead you. What would that look like? What would that look like for you to pause and pray? What would it look like for you to let go? And I know it's corny, but let God. The second thing that you see in Proverbs chapter 1, the first thing that is super interesting to me is the actual point of the Proverbs, of Proverbs chapter 1, is that the fear of God is the beginning of real knowledge, real understanding, real wisdom, right? But if you back up to the beginning of the verse when we were reading it, it says, the Proverbs, this is verse 1 through 4, the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, for gaining wisdom and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right, just, and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, right? And knowledge and discretion to the young. In other words, if you want to pursue wisdom, then you actually have to go after it. Like, you're not going to just drift into wise decisions. In fact, we never drift in good directions. We always drift in bad directions. You're not going to drift into wise decisions. You drifted into debt, but you won't drift out. You'll have to crawl out. You'll have to gain knowledge, and then you'll have to apply that knowledge, which is wisdom, to get yourself out of debt. You can drift into a terrible marriage or a terrible relationship, but for you to build that marriage into something wonderful that's God-fearing, that's going to require effort, work, and energy on your part. Wise learners, they ask questions, then they listen, and then they grow based off of the information that they apply based off what they're learning. In other words, they live out what they've been learning. That's what I call discipleship. Wise learning, wise listeners, wise learners. Living out what you've been learning. Applying in your everyday walking around, boring, eating, sleeping life, the things that you know that God's been speaking to you. But part of the problem is that we ask questions like toddlers most of the time. Like, if you had an audience with the Most High, if you could sit at the feet of the Father, which, by the way, for all intents and purposes, you do by the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit in your life, what questions would you ask God? The number one question that people ask me, and when they ask me this question, they're asking me because they believe that I somehow have a more connected line to God than they do. And it's not that I have a more connected line to God than they do. I just know where I left my phone. I'm just consistent in my communication with him. And the number one question that they ask me is, why is this happening to me? You know that question, honestly, I'm sorry if you're feeling that feeling right now, but feelings can be false. That question is the most childish, toddler question I've ever heard. And here's what I mean by that. I have grandkids, a bunch of them now, and the number one question that each of my grandkids ask me when they ask me something is why. Now, my oldest grandson, early in life, would say, why? And we were like, that's a dumb question. That's not a good question. You need better questions. Now, you can judge my grandparenting style if you want, whatever, that's cool. Once you have 8+ grandkids, you don't want to hear why all the time, right? Could you imagine being the Father in heaven, and every time someone gets themselves in a situation by their own choosing, they're like, why, God, why are you doing this to me? And they did it to themselves. And so when they ask the question why, I instruct them to come up with better questions. And so when Abraham, the oldest grandkid, was little, he started saying, why? And I would say, like I say to all toddlers that are in my life, and I have the right to speak into their life, you need better questions. I'm having this conversation with Gideon right now. You need better questions. Abraham came up with a much better question at a very young age. It was, what you doing? And then you'd tell him, and then he'd be like, why? And then he'd jump to that terrible question. And so then I was like, nope, you did it again. And he's like, what you doing tomorrow? And then he'd switch, what's Sita? That's my wife, that's what he calls her. What's Sita doing? And so he started to ask probing questions about what was happening in his world around him with his limited understanding instead of why. Now his baby brother Gideon is stuck in why mode. Why? So he comes out and he's heard his brother say it. He says, Pops, what you doing? And I said, almost every time I see him, drinking coffee. And then he goes, why? Because coffee's good, right? Why? Because God made it that way. Why? Well, because if you take coffee and you grind it up and you add hot water and a little bit of cream and a little bit of sugar, it's amazing. It's powerful. It'll change your life, little man. He doesn't understand any of that, right? So I started saying to him, you need better questions. Ask a different question, buddy. And he did it. He finally did it. I was so proud of him. He's like, what's that? And I was like, oh, there it is. That's a coffee cup. You know, and like he started to ask a question that could actually gain knowledge, and knowledge, right, can be applied over time, which is wisdom. But if you don't have respect, in the same way that a toddler doesn't have the ability to show respect to a grandparent, they have to learn it and they have to earn it. They just go, why? Why is a huge waste of an adult's time. These are childish questions. And so when you ask God, why, instead of what's next, or what could I have done different, or what would you have me do, God, or what should my posture be in this situation, or what is happening around me, or what choices have I made that opened the door for this to actually happen in my life? You're like, Pastor, you're just getting into semantics. You're ultimately asking why. No, I mean, maybe, but I'm asking in a way that I could actually grow. I'm pursuing the wisdom. I'm not trying to drift into it with a bunch of whys. I'm saying, what if there was more to this than what I see with my eyes? What if this is a deeper conversation? And then I have to sit and pay attention to what he speaks to me. Have you ever had someone ask you a question and before you can answer it, they're asking another one? Oh, you just want to hear your own voice. You don't actually want to learn anything. Wisdom doesn't always shout. In fact, most of the time, wisdom whispers. And if you're moving at such a rapid pace because of the pressure that you feel in this life and you don't slow down, you just might miss it. That's why I want to challenge you to schedule time in your life to just be still and hear God's voice. I mean, God built the weekly rhythm when he made the earth. You know, on the first day, the second day, the third day, right? He saw it and he said it was good. He made the sun, the moon, the stars, man, animals, the trees, the water, the fish, and everything that you could see that you know that it is life here on this planet. And then on the seventh day, what did he do? He rested. He built into the weekly rhythm the concept of rest, the concept of being still, the concept of Sabbath, and in the information that we've been given and the feelings that we've believed to be fact have told us to go, run, pack it all in. You only live once, get it all done, get it done as fast as possible. You could do more, you're not doing enough, and if you don't do more, you're not enough. I'm going to tell you something, busyness isn't success, nor is it a badge of honor. You need to take breaks. And so you need to Sabbath weekly. In other words, you need to take time off. And you need to retreat regularly. And you need to rest daily. You can't run on empty. You can't give away what you don't have. So imagine what it would look like if you just paused before a meeting and asked God to be there instead of just going under the pressure and acting out of duress. Imagine what it would look like if you took full advantage of a Sunday gathering amongst other people to be in his presence and to rest in the worship and to hear the word of God and allow the knowledge to transform you and become wisdom over time. How might your choices shift if you just slowed down enough to hear his whisper? Could it be that the wisdom is already all around you, the knowledge that you need to become wise, the information that's important enough for you to apply, and you just haven't slowed down long enough to actually receive it? What I'm getting at here is wisdom actually shapes who you're becoming. I say this all the time. Maybe you're tired of hearing it. I don't know. But what we believe or what we learn, what we know, right? Because we get information and then we decide whether we believe it or not. And what we believe or what we do or how we apply that information shapes who we become. And who we become shapes how we behave. And I'm a firm believer that God cares deeply about the becoming. The transfer of knowledge from the head to the hands by bypassing the heart is a lack of wisdom and is probably the biggest problem that our world faces. I can download the information and then I have action, but I have no wisdom. And yes, I can watch a YouTube video to fix my car. I'm so grateful for that information because a number of years ago, I couldn't do that. I had to go buy a manual that I couldn't afford or borrow one from a friend and go step by step with pictures and hope that I could get it. Now I can watch somebody do it, and their wisdom is being transmitted to me via video. That's great. But just because I watched a video on how to change the transmission on a car doesn't mean I'm wise enough to change the transmission on a car. I can attempt it. I might make it happen, but I have to draw from other sources of wisdom because I've never done it before. Wisdom shapes who you're becoming. In fact, look at verse 5, Proverbs chapter 1, verse 5. Let the wise listen and add to their learning. In other words, the book of wisdom is saying, Solomon, this is a proverb of Solomon, the wisest king that ever was, is saying, never stop learning. It's not wise to say you know it all. You need to keep learning. There is more for you to gather, to grasp, to grow. Keep learning. Keep growing. Let the discerning get guidance. The wisest people that I know aren't the ones with the loudest answers. They're the ones with the softest hearts. In other words, they're the ones who are always open into the idea of becoming. Becoming the men and women of God He's called us to be. The knowledge is great. The wisdom is wonderful, but it's just the beginning. The fear of God shaping who I'm becoming is so important. And so when you embrace the wisdom and you allow it to shape your character for you to become, because what we really want in our lives is, if we're being honest, is we want the information to skip our heart and go directly to our hands. In fact, if there was a way for us as a society to go from information directly to hands, we would do it. That's why we love robots. That's why we love AI. That's why we love all the things that make our lives fast and easy. Because it's complicated to let it move from head knowledge to heart knowledge, and heart knowledge to wisdom, and wisdom to shape who I am. I just want to get it done. So instead of it just being a mark in my calendar or a mark on my to-do list, it becomes something deeper, something greater. God, shape my calendar. Don't just shape my character, not just my calendar. And that's why people that I think are wise ask these kind of questions like, well, who am I becoming? Not just, what should I do? I think this is the ethical dilemma of our day. It's not why, but what is going on inside of me? Not even what's next, but what am I going to do to allow room for the Holy Spirit to shape me for this next season? Who am I becoming? What if wisdom wasn't actually about outcomes in your life, but what if it was about becoming the person that God's called you to be by just following the process? In fact, I think God might be inviting you to grow, not simply succeed. Yes, we all want to succeed, but real success is who we're becoming. And so that's my challenge for you this week and for the rest of this series as we grow together, is that we wouldn't look at this as just a simple way to download to get the answers, a quick step to get successful. This isn't, 4 weeks to the wisest person that you could possibly be. But in other words, this is really about who am I becoming? And the wisest thing that you can do is you can focus on who you are becoming as an individual. The influences and the information are going to shape you. And who you become will ultimately be demonstrated by how you behave. And if you short circuit or you try to shortcut or do an end run around the becoming, then your behavior will have no soul, no heart, and no real longevity and no real impact. So if I could give you one thing from the book of wisdom, God cares about who you are becoming.